What is up, everyone, and welcome to Drop In, where we have open, authentic conversations about all things mental health, including exciting 2025 scientific research in mental health. It only took me 3 times to get the title of this episode right.
Casual.
Dr. Jackie, how are you?
Fantastic. I'm excited to talk about this stuff today.
Well, it had me thinking of like when you're in school for psychology, you're reading 3 to 4 research papers before every class.
Yeah.
Sometimes more.
Yeah,
sometimes less, but in that range. And then you get out of school. How often are you reading the scientific literature?
Yeah, a hell of a lot less, that's for sure. I mean, I feel like I try to stay up to date on things, but it's definitely not at the same frequency.
How can it be? You're in 3 or 4 different classes, so it can add up. You might be reading 12 scientific articles a week. That's a lot, especially if you're not just reading the abstracts, especially if you're getting into some of the methods and results and, conclusions there. But this is something we saw an awesome post about that we're going to get into about ADHD medication. And it made us sort of think of like, what other exciting scientific research has come out this year that we should talk about?
Yeah.
Then we did the deep dive. How many articles did I read that halfway through I'm like, I don't.
Next.
It just seemed too nuanced. Maybe I wasn't understanding it, if I'm being honest. But it's just hard. It's hard for science builds little block by little block, little interventions. And so it's not that often that you get an article that you're like, wow, this really changes what might come next or what we think about in terms of like intervention. That's what I think about what we do day to day, as psychologists, as therapists. We're not researchers.
Right.
If we would have went that academic researcher route, we'd be reading a lot more articles per day, per week. But when you're trying to deal with client dynamics and diving into sort of the weeds with each individual client you have, there just closes, this door sort of swings a little bit more shut of like, are you reading into the science?
Right. No, it's actually really fun for me to like tease through all of the different articles and really read through all of like the methods and like think through all the critical lenses, because a lot of times it is very much like you're reading new studies or you're doing trainings for like your, continuing education. And there's not a ton of like actual research articles that you're reading on like a consistent regular basis. It's a lot more training oriented, or you're getting more of like the information already summarized for you. So it actually was kind of like nostalgic, like reading through all of these articles and actually going through like the methods and all the ways that they actually conducted the studies. So I'm excited to talk about it.
It is fun. It activates a different part of your brain.
Yeah.
It certainly does, because then it makes you start thinking of like, how could they have done this research design differently? What might be next? We won't go too far into the weeds on this podcast, but first study, psilocybin.
Yes.
Have you heard of her?
I sure have.
It feels like the last 4, sort of 5 years, I feel like it really started popping onto the scene like around the pandemic, 2020-ish is when I feel like I first heard like, wow, psilocybin, which is the active compound the psychoactive compound in magic mushrooms, might be really helpful for depression.
Yes.
So at the Psychedelic Science Conference this year, just a few months ago, where of all places can you guess the city it was held in?
My vote is Colorado.
Denver, Colorado. You got the state, but you would have guessed Denver, sure. In Denver, Colorado.
My old stomping grounds.
Of course. Researchers revealed that up to 67% of participants in this study who were treated for major depressive disorder with a single psilocybin-assisted session. Don't make me try to say that again. remained in remission 5 years later.
That's impressive.
67% of participants followed 5 years later. In the initial study, 82% were in full remission from depression after 1 month.
Wow.
So this single session of taking psilocybin was accompanied with psychotherapy, which is always important to articulate.
Right.
Because sometimes when we get in these discussions about psilocybin or other substances, you can't negate the factor of having an expert with you,
right,
and having this holding space to sort of do the things we often do in psychotherapy.
Right.
Talk to me about what's coming up with you. Let's express the thoughts, the emotions, let's process what's arising in the now.
Right. This isn't just taking mushrooms with your friends in your backyard. This is very much a guided treatment protocol.
It needs to be stated because, a lot of people can listen to this and listen, conversations can be had in a lot of different directions of, does the FDA have our back? Do they have our best interest? Are things being sort of diluted and this and that? But the important thing to know is these people knew what they were getting. It was measured and accurate, and it was with an expert who is familiar with this protocol. Where if you just get certain substances from nowhere, how do you know what you're actually getting?
Right. They're not regulated in the same way. So you're not necessarily sure if the potency is the same or how much you're getting versus not getting. And you're not able to control for all of those factors.
Absolutely. So, yeah, this has been talked about for a while of what is psilocybin doing to the brain. And so these are some of the things that we know or have some evidence on, is that it increases neuroplasticity, which is essentially neuroplasticity helps create new connections between neurons and helps flexibility in how circuits fire. Why this is important is we know this default mode network, which is activated and sort of loops around, especially when we self-reflect or we're ruminating, is so prominent in depression. Like when we scan the brains of people who have depression, we see this default mode network, the circuit sort of lighting up. But we know when someone takes psilocybin, it sort of decreases the dominance of this default mode network and allows other circuitry, to put it very, generally, other parts of the brain light up.
Right.
And so we also know it's boosting emotional processing. And if you read case studies and listen to people who take psilocybin, they'll report this of like, I was able to express a sadness that I wasn't able to access before, or even like joy, but there's just this heightened expression of emotion.
Right.
We'll tie all this into depression in a minute. But we also know for some people, it facilitates these sort of mystical or perspective shifting experiences. And that can include like feeling a sense of unity, of awe, which teaser to an article we're going to talk about in a minute about concept of awe. But it's allowing people to sort of expand and get out of, again, this rigid brain default mode that we see so often in depression.
Yeah. So interesting, especially because it sounds like it very much expedites the process of a lot of the things that we would be doing in therapy and kind of kickstarts that processing and what it is that we're actually looking to transition, and looking at some of those patterns and the way that our brain just automatically gets used to the same default mode and narrative that we continuously see the world through this certain lens, and being able to shift that and use a substance that actually activates that part of the brain to shift that and kickstart that process. Yeah, I could see how that would be super helpful.
Because we talk about a lot when you hold what is the most difficult part in being a therapist, like almost what is a hard quality to shift in a client.
Mm-hmm.
We come back and talk a lot about rigidity.
Yeah.
Because if there's any quality on the opposite side that, like, if a client walked in, and it's not on liking, it's like, and a lot of times we get asked those questions of like, oh, do you like these clients better?
Yeah.
It's about predicting outcomes and speed of outcome.
Right.
I'd be interested in other therapists' take on this. We align in this of when a therapist comes in, or when a client comes in rather, and they are open to change. And have a certain flexibility of seeing things different or doing things different. Sometimes people refer to this as like the action sort of stage of change. You can feel a sense of this might be pretty quick.
Yeah.
You know, maybe they stay in therapy because they enjoy the process and want sort of ongoing self-reflection, whatever. But it's a lot harder to create change when someone is really stuck. And again, it's normal to feel scared. It's normal to feel uncomfortable. And these are things that, again, you work through in psychotherapy. But when someone has more of a rigid sort of presentation, change is hard.
Right. And I think that talks to the aspect of cognitive flexibility, right? How open they are to exploring different ways of thinking and different ways of looking at things, or different ways to engage with the world or see the world through a different lens. And for the people that are coming in with more of that openness and flexibility in terms of their thinking and willingness to look at some of those patterns that they are continuously kind of stuck in, I think the change just happens a lot faster. And it sounds like this is another mode of being able to speed up that flexibility and that openness to get to a different piece of change that for some people is really challenging.
And I hope in this discussion people aren't hearing, we don't think it's people's fault.
No.
It's not that we think people should, get rid of that, snap your finger, get rid of that rigidity, Michelle. The essence of depression and trauma in a lot of ways is getting stuck in this overprotective sort of brain network. And what we try to do in psychotherapy is help people expand out, you know, process, release, you know, emotion, you know, talk about the cognitive sort of aspect of the narrative we're telling ourselves, but move towards flexibility.
Yeah.
And it's an uncomfortable process. We talk about it all the time. Like, therapy is hard, but using psilocybin and all the data that's coming out, it feels like exactly what you said. It's expediting this process of allowing people this sort of, you know, I hate to say instantaneous, but these are single dose sessions. And I came across another article, as one does when we go down the rabbit hole, on postpartum depression. And again, single session using psilocybin and very similar results.
Interesting.
To having a lot of alleviation of depressive symptoms after a single session of psilocybin.
That's what's so interesting to me, because you hear a lot about even like microdosing psilocybin, and I wonder what the difference would be. And I honestly don't know the background or the research behind that. But I know that there is a lot of difference between like even ketamine therapy, which is also kind of on the forefront. But ketamine, I think you have to take repeatedly. It's kind of like you're microdosing. So I'd be really curious to dive into that research, if there is any of these bigger dosages for a single session versus microdosing, and if it has the same effect or not.
This is why the science and continued research is so important, because even if we change the whole conversation to something that people know about and change the conversation to caffeine, you know dang well listening right now, you have an idea of the amount of caffeine you can take to feel,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I'm a little more awake. I feel like my thoughts are firing a little faster. I have some ideas versus when it tips over into, I do not feel well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not to say, I'm certainly not equating caffeine acts the same in the brain as
Right.
psilocybin. No, I'm not equating that, but I'm like, this is the nuance of understanding how a substance impacts you.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we like to collect a lot of data. These studies that have come out have been relatively small, 30 or less. So we have a long way to go. But
Yeah.
each study that comes out, there's something about psilocybin in the brain that is opening up flexibility, options that, especially when you talk about depression,
Mm-hmm.
is unlocking and helping people move through it.
Right.
So exciting.
That's so awesome. I'm definitely intrigued to see how the research continues to develop in that area because, if there is a method that can expedite that process, and again, even in a single session that has benefits even 5 years later.
5 years?
That's huge. Huge.
Yeah, and they allow it to be randomized control trials. So you don't know what, maybe some people are still doing psychotherapy or not, but still for that maintenance. And after 1 month, over 80% of the participants were in full remission after a month.
I also wonder too if there's a certain attitude that you have to go in with when it comes to that session, because I would think that there might be some people who are concerned or afraid of what they might experience, right? And maybe have some feelings about certain substances that they deem, not pharmaceutical, or they deem as, more quote unquote drug versus medication.
It'll be interesting because, we know expectation bias plays a role and belief effects play a role. And, in a randomized controlled trial, you're hoping all that is just randomized throughout.
Right.
But I know some of the concerns as you look forward for me is like, what about people who are in recovery?
Mm-hmm.
You worry about the sober community, people in recovery of like, could it? And again, it's just a question is like, could this create sort of a relapse?
Right.
Maybe not. But these are the things that you roll forward and you gain more information, collecting data samples from different populations.
Yeah.
But certainly for people who struggle with depression, I think this is one of the most exciting things that is out right now as far as treatments.
Mm-hmm. Especially for treatment-resistant depression. Yeah. So fascinating.
Oh, so we're both excited about that.
Mm-hmm.
What do you got? The ADHD.
I'm so excited to talk about this one. Okay. So there was this massive study that came out of Sweden that just got published about a week ago. They looked at population data. So close to 150,000 people.
1,000.
That's huge.
We love huge. We expand to get huge data and sample sizes because it speaks, of course, more to the masses than 30 people.
Right. And huge differences in terms of like lifespan. So age 6 to 64. And they looked at people who were newly diagnosed with ADHD. And then they looked at the people who immediately started medication and the people who did not. And the outcomes were fascinating because there are some studies that have already been done on some of this research, but this is the biggest that I know to date. So they tracked outcomes for 2 years after they were diagnosed and to see how medication versus non-medication had impacted outcomes. So overall, there were significant reductions across suicidal behaviors, substance misuse, accidental injuries, transport accidents, and criminality. That's fascinating. And pretty significant reduction. So suicidal behavior is reduced by 15%, substance misuse 25%, accidental injury is 4%, transport accidents 16%, and criminality 25% reduction. That's huge.
And again, so these are reductions of the group that got diagnosed and on medication.
Yes.
Experienced all these reductions in all these different areas versus the group, of course, who did not take medication.
Correct.
Got it.
Initial thoughts?
Yeah. Fascinated, and in some ways not surprising, but it speaks to when we talk about the benefits of medication, we are talking about widespread. It's not just I can pay attention better and that sort of helped me on this task.
Right.
It's what else is this sort of upstream or downstream impacting that helps me live healthier and not go to other areas that we know can be harmful for ourselves.
Right. Yeah, it was so interesting even thinking about it from my own lens. And usually when you think about medication, you think about, does this reduce the symptoms, right? What is the impact on X, Y, and Z criteria that you are meeting? And to your point, this is something that's looking at the implications and the broader, aspects of that. And even from my own perspective and my own lens, being late diagnosed, I was not on medication growing up or in my teens or even early adulthood. And thinking about some of these exact aspects, I 1000% see this in my own experience. I almost got my license suspended within a month of getting my license because I was driving so recklessly and so impulsively that I got so many speeding tickets. And we're not talking like 10 miles over. We're talking like 30, 40, 50 miles an hour over the speed limit. And so because of that and my reckless endangerment for myself and other people, I wasn't thinking about those aspects. I wasn't thinking about long-term outcomes. I wasn't thinking about my safety or other people's safety. I was just sensory seeking and being impulsive. And while that didn't happen for me, luckily, thank God, I'm still here and never actually had any major issues with that. I think back on that and I'm like, if I would have been on medication, maybe that would have been different.
Well, based on this research, it seems like there's a good chance, right? Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that because I think a lot of these things can just get brushed under the rug of well, you're young. Oh, you're just a young teenager who doesn't know better. But the mechanism we're seeing, or it's sort of that can be looked at it this medication is helping with impulsivity, whether it's reckless driving, whether it's using substances, whether it's, self-harm, that we know impulsivity can play a role in a lot of these different things.
Right. Yeah, it's just so fascinating because, again, thinking about my own experience and thinking about the broader aspects and implications, a lot of times I didn't see my behavior and my actions and my dysregulation as symptoms. I just thought that was part of who I was. And that's just, I was a quote unquote bad kid. And I, was defiant because these are all the things that I was told, right? I was told, you never listen. You're so defiant. Why don't you ever, listen to what you're told? And why are you acting so extreme? And all the things, right, that we get labeled as someone with ADHD. And even in terms of the emotion regulation and people using substances for their own regulation and for their own kind of self-medication. And I know I also fell into that camp. I used marijuana for years to self-medicate. That was the only thing that kind of kept me calm. That was the only thing that helped me sleep. And quite frankly, that was probably an impulsive decision at the time, but I was in high school and college, And that was the only thing that was able to really regulate when I was frustrated, upset, angry, irritated, which was pretty often. So regularly using marijuana, and then I'm driving, I'm engaging in things that I probably shouldn't be engaging in, or hanging out with people that I probably shouldn't have hung out with. And again, thinking about where I'm at now, having the medication and being on the medication that I am, those things don't even cross my mind anymore as urges, as options, none of that. It's such a stark contrast feeling like I have regulation over myself because of the medications that I'm taking now. And I just really think about what could have been different. And that's not to blame anyone or say, I should have been diagnosed or whatever. They didn't know back then, right? Like they didn't have the same assessment, the same tools, the same knowledge that was so widespread. And I think it just really, really shows the importance of paying attention to some of these potential symptoms and being able to have the proper medication for that.
I really appreciate you sharing that. And there shouldn't be anything surprising about this. Meaning, when you're feeling things that don't have a name, because you don't have a diagnosis, you don't have sort of the mental health information, education, and you're literally a teenager trying to figure out what is life,
right?
Which ironically never stops. But you're in the midst of this developmental period, and yeah, substances can get explored. And you try this, you're like, wow, this for me is helping me slow down, or this is making me feel more regulated, or any number of things. And then absolutely, you think about how you feel today and you're like, I now am filling the same gaps I was trying to fill back then.
Right.
But back then, all I had access to for some people was like weed or alcohol or whatever, substance. And it's not that effective.
Right.
It's effective for a particular symptom, but it has other symptoms and implications that aren't as helpful.
Right.
And this is why we study substances and medications.
Right.
And we track them over the long haul with big populations, see, is this more effective than that? But people are conducting their own scientific research.
Right.
With the limited information that they have.
Right. Well, and especially having such a huge study like this.
Massive.
Also outside of the US. So this is outside of all of our like political kind of discussions and, implications of who's funding this and who's funding that and what biases might be inherently implied within that. This is based off of census data. And so utilizing that and realizing how starkly contrasted medication versus non-medication is for implications that also impact other people.
Of course.
The community, the people that are being endangered, or, all of those other aspects that I think about. And I'm like, thank God this is coming out finally. These are things that I think a lot of both parents are concerned about putting their kids on medications. I think doctors a lot of times are still worried about putting people on certain medications. And I just hope that this is research that really does get out there and starts to shift some of the biases and the perspectives, in particular about stimulant medication, because they even looked at the differences between stimulant versus non-stimulant medications within the study, and stimulants outperformed non-stimulants. There was still obviously a change in, medication versus non-medication, but stimulants outperformed the non-stims.
Just, again, important nuance. Listen, there's a lot of things, especially in the American political and societal system that we live in, that are not a good or healthy direction for us, but especially one of them is sort of the anti-science. And again, we want people to be skeptical. Who's funding the research? We want, as we learn in school and we're taught in school to be, skeptical when you read any research article and lean in. But let's still trust science overall versus what some random business person or politician says.
Right.
Why would we think one person has our best interest versus data on 100,000 plus people? And this is the thing where it's like, how can you not be like, education is more important now than ever?
Yeah.
I'd always be skeptical. Fine.
Right.
But when you make decisions and there's always going to be individual differences, this is why going through this stuff is so important, because biases come from the strangest places. People who hold power, people who are, again, not just politicians, religious leaders, business leaders, people in power positions who are just talking out of their ass. And I see it all the time on social media.
Right.
This isn't based on any data, what you're saying.
And I hope, too, that even for the psychiatrists and the medical doctors and primary care doctors who hopefully have access to this and are, staying up to date on their research as well, this is something that I've heard time and time again, and I've experienced this firsthand, where you go to a provider and they have their own biases against certain stimulant medications, or they kind of make you feel like you are drug seeking because you are coming in with these concerns. And of course, I want doctors to do their due diligence and not just, hand out medication all willy-nilly. But if someone has a diagnosis from another provider and they've gone through all the testing, they've gotten the assessments done, and they have this diagnosis, stimulants are clearly, according to the research, the best line of treatment for ADHD. And we're seeing the implications. We're seeing how much of a positive impact and protective impact they're having on people. So I hope that this also continues to shift the bias and shift the perspective, not just of, the general population, but also even within medical care.
Absolutely. And this is why being open to new research and new frames of thinking within any medical care or mental health care profession is so important. Another study, and then we'll get into our listener questions. We love low-cost, low-intensity interventions.
For sure.
Just as we love medication, access to medication, cost of medication, all these things can be variable, but especially within psychology, we love things where like someone could pretty much do this anywhere. They don't need a prescription. They don't need anything. The concept of awe, I had never heard of this. I think this concept of being in awe is really cool because we talk so much about emotional states. And if you've known me for a minute, I don't like the words positive and negative emotions. I just don't. But I understand why they're used. I usually like to say pleasant, unpleasant emotions, even though I feel like any emotion, you could be sad and it can still have a pleasant type effect. So even that feels limiting in the labeling. I'm going on and on. But anywho, investigating states that are sort of positive or sort of in a direction of helpful versus just like what is wrong with you. So triggering this awe is what this research study looked at. They were looking at a sample of individuals who had long COVID. So it's even more interesting because this is a sample that is having long-term symptoms, and COVID can be really vast. Of course, whether it's respiratory symptoms, memory, mood, energy, but this is particularly looking at this group who is, struggling with these long-term COVID effects. And they induce this protocol of awe, which this is how they induce that. So awe, of course, is a great acronym. The A stands for attention, full and undivided attention on things you appreciate, value, or find amazing. The W is wait, slow down, and pause. So you're really soaking up into this thing. And the E is exhale, expand, amplify whatever sensations you are experiencing. So they had participants do this at least 3 times a day. It didn't have to be anything extraordinary. It could be things like me, I'm into plants, of just really appreciating, maybe even touching gently my plant as I'm doing off screen here, my beautiful Monstera, but really zooming fully in, my full attention, slowing down, appreciating, taking in any sensations that sort of come up. This is a mindfulness intervention.
I was just thinking that. Like, everything about this screams mindfulness.
And listen, I had a supervisor when I was in school who was always like, psychology loves to give you old wine with a new label, which again, there's nothing wrong with it. But I'm like, this is literally, when I taught mindfulness-based stress reduction courses, this is just a mindful, a mindful listening exercise.
Right.
Like being fully present. But you're really trying to captivate or inspire this sense of awe in anything you're doing. And so they're looking at people who have long COVID, and they looked across many symptoms. But what they found was the protocol reduced depressive symptoms and boosted well-being overall in adults compared to the control group. So
believe that.
3 times a day, these people, and the effects were moderate to large. We always look at, what's the effect? Is it a small effect? Is it a moderate size or large? All the effects were either in the moderate range or large. It had a big impact of 3 times a day, people slowing down, really being captivated by something in their life. And it wouldn't matter what it was. Again, I'm using plants as an example because I like plants.
Sure.
Could be listening to music, going for an awe walk. There's a lot of these different things. But this concept that gets brought up in mindfulness practice a lot is using beginner's mind, which is like, if you're going to go for a walk, imagine you're an alien from another planet. You just arrived at Earth and you're walking around experiencing everything for the first time. What are you seeing? What are you smelling? What are you hearing? What are you feeling on your skin? But what we know through the research, at least in mindfulness on this, is it's activating different circuits in your brain.
Right. Yeah, it's so interesting. As I was looking at this article, everything to me screamed mindfulness. And it's something that, again, if you're given this protocol or you're practicing something 3 times a day, I think it very much changes the way that we look for things. And whether it's mindfulness, whether it's a gratitude practice, whether it's, seeking these moments of awe, I think as you are practicing these things, especially on a consistent basis, not just once a day, but a few times throughout the day, your brain starts to kind of shift its perspective and start looking for more of those moments or more of those, stimuli that help to create these experiences. And I don't see any drawback to engaging in these mindfulness exercises. The only thing that I can say is that this would be positive for probably anyone to include more mindfulness moments, especially if you're, setting an alarm and you're following a protocol. The more you practice, the more it starts to get ingrained. And as we know, neuroplasticity takes over and starts to create these new networks of connections and start looking for more opportunities for that.
Absolutely. It goes back to a theme that we know, like in psychology in general. It's not the stimuli, it's your experience of it. So it's like right now, we get all these sun showers in Florida where it just starts pouring, but the sun's out. I could be on my way to the office and I'm like, shoot, I'm running behind. I got to get in that door. And then it starts sun showering. And I'm like, damn it. And I put my head down. I've done this plenty of times. And I sprint to the door and I'm like, gosh, I got to open up the office, turn on all the lights. I'm soaking wet. I don't have enough time to really dry off. The client's going to be here. That's a miserable experience because of the interpretations going on.
Right.
Versus we get our son out there during a sun shower. He's on his scooter. He is laughing, giggling, and you experience this warm rain through the
Yeah.
lens of a 4-year-old on their scooter who's just smiling, laughing, and like going through the sun drops. It's the same stimuli.
Right.
The rain is the same.
Mm-hmm.
Your experience of it in being in awe. And like you had just said, and like we talked about with the psilocybin, it's getting out of that default mode network.
Right.
That I think, even if we're not talking about depression, I think we all get in these default modes, especially
Sure.
behavioral modes of like, I wake up in the morning, I lay there, I scroll for 30 minutes. And, we do all these things where it's like this idea of having this like awe intervention of like, beep, 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 the phone goes off and you're like, what can I be in awe of this moment? I'm going to be in awe of my cat or my dog or this artwork that I've been working on, or I'm going to play music that really, I'm going to tune in and listen to. That you are triggering this other mode, and it is a practice.
Right.
And that's what I always used to emphasize with mindfulness. People constantly have the experience of like, yeah, I tried a mindfulness practice once, or I tried meditation once, not for me. And I always would respond of like, that's like saying I went to the gym once, not for me. Went for the gym once, I'm not strong. And anyone would be like, yeah, it's a practice. You got to lift weights more than one time.
Right.
But to be honest, like we are in this, era where we want everything to be a one-off. And I'm not saying I'm above that, but most things, especially in psychological intervention or therapy, it's like, it's a practice you do many times to sort of interrupt or change or, create new networks in the brain or behaviorally.
Right. And essentially what ends up happening for all of us is we do get into these patterns and routines and ways of experiencing life on a day-to-day basis because it is the easiest way for our brain to go on autopilot. Our brain wants things that are easy, consistent, doesn't have to think super hard about what it is that we're doing on a day-to-day basis. So in order to conserve energy, it goes into these default modes, which on one hand, yes, it's conserving energy. But on the other hand, if you're in a default mode that isn't necessarily adaptive or making you feel great, those are the things that we need to challenge. And this is one of those ways that, again, whether it's mindfulness, whether it's gratitude, whether it's seeking awe moments, anything that you can do to kind of break your brain out of that default cycle. Yes, it's challenging because your brain isn't on autopilot. But at the same time, recognizing that that actually is changing your experience and, again, changing your outcome and how you feel about the exact same stimulus, that's where it's kind of the moneymaker, if you will.
Which is so cool, where you see this very, again, low cost, no cost intervention protocol to follow.
Right.
That makes a big difference that people could do because, yeah, data on Alzheimer's and age-related cognitive decline in brain health in general, you do not want to be in automatic pilot over the long haul. It is not good for your brain health. It is not good for your well-being. Although I agree with you of like, some people are like, well, who cares? I just want to conserve energy. No, the data that we have on your brain and aging is if you stop challenging yourself, if you stop growing, if you stop sort of learning new things, it's a decline that is poor for outcomes. So yes, there's always a sweet middle, but don't ever believe that the automatic pilot is good for you.
Right.
Is definitely not good for you as far as brain health is concerned.
Right. And oftentimes well-being is concerned either.
Correct. Yes, we know that being able to lean forward, have flexibility, try new things, keep adapting is what often keeps people, especially in the research we know on blue zones and people living past 100 and having higher quality of life. There's a movement and sort of a connection to things versus people who truly retire, sit at home, watch TV all day. The outcomes are poorer.
Yeah.
Hey, let's get into your listener questions.
Yay.
Always so thoughtful, so interesting. We really appreciate you dropping those questions in. This one's from Batman.
Love it already.
Because I put on it of like, you don't ever have to give us your real name. It's just we want to be able to refer to you. And I said, choose any name you like, even a super cool option. Batman's a super cool option.
I love this.
Love it. How do you overcome feelings of embarrassment and shame about a topic when trying to talk about a subject that brings up these emotions? I have a great therapist now, but a previous therapist broke a lot of trust and made me feel more ashamed and embarrassed. So overcoming these hurdles feels a lot harder.
Ooh, great question, Batman.
Yeah, what are your initial thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, my first initial thought is I'm sorry that you had an experience with a previous therapist that made you feel that way because yeah, the entire part of therapy is you want to foster that trust, that non-judgmental place to really feel safe to explore some of these emotions because those emotions are very normal. That's very human. We all have experiences that bring up shame and embarrassment and, feelings of guilt. And so I'm really glad that you found a therapist that you now feel safe with. And it can still be really hard to talk about those things, even in a dynamic that feels very safe and trusting. And I think it can be really helpful to name that on the front end and just say, listen, I have something that I do want to talk about that brings up a lot of shame and feelings of embarrassment for me. And I'm hesitant because I had this experience with a previous therapist or in a previous relationship or that dynamic. But I think it is important to talk about. And yeah, usually that is something that your therapist can then hold space for not only the emotion and the example that you're wanting to share, but also can talk through what that experience might be like for you and hold space in a different way and in a different lens. And they would understand how important that is for you. So that would be my recommendation.
I totally agree with everything. And I just think and I'm also, of course, sorry you had that experience. It definitely goes against Roger's sort of core ingredients for therapy there. But even if you hadn't had that experience, leaning into a corrective emotional experience is hard.
Mm-hmm.
It just is. Like, these are things we've thought about for a long time, or we felt for a long time. And it's the first time we're really sharing this, with someone. There's just an uncomfortability. I know I've felt that in my own personal therapy of like, gosh. And I totally agree with what Jackie said of like just being able to say of like, this makes me uncomfortable. And I did have a previous bad experience because there's part of me that's like, that also needs to be processed.
Right.
That also needs to have space of like, it adds a layer to it of, I got kind of judged or cut off or in whatever way that played out that didn't make you feel safe.
Right.
And so being able to have that as the corrective experience as well to really air out of like, yeah, this is how my previous therapist made me feel. I think there's an opportunity for it to be like doubly corrective.
Agreed.
And that clients have brought that up to me before as well of like, my last therapist said this and that. I'm like, oh my God, like, how did that impact you? And yeah, I got into like, it made me feel like I couldn't really bring it up. It made me feel like it's my fault. It made me feel like I'm stupid. Like, I've had clients say all the things.
Of course.
But what a great thing to process in therapy.
Agreed. Love that question.
Next question, Misty, down under, all the way in Australia. I love seeing where people are submitting their questions from. Makes me so excited. What is the best way to support a spouse that's experiencing complex mental health issues when they are pushing you and all their loved ones away?
Good question.
We talk about that a lot, of movement towards, movement away, of sort of how people respond. This can bring up shame and guilt and judgment, a lot of different emotions of when we're experiencing mental health things. But what's your thought on this, especially, looking through the lens of a spouse who's going through an ongoing, mental health issue that's complex and they're pushing everyone away?
Yeah. I mean, my first thought would be if this person is open to help or not. And they might be. So one way that you can have that discussion with them is by bringing up that you're concerned about them and saying, you know, I'm noticing these things. And
things being what specifically?
I'm noticing these behaviors. I'm noticing that you have withdrawn. I'm noticing that you aren't getting out of bed anymore. I'm noticing that you're not doing the things that you used to be doing. Whatever the changes that you're seeing or are concerned about are. Sometimes it helps to name those things. And by, again, approaching it from this lens of, I'm concerned about you. I love you. I care about you. I, you know, want the best for you. I'm noticing these things. Is this something that I can help find resources for you? And sometimes people are open to that, and sometimes they're not super open to that or might get defensive. And it sounds like maybe, you know, your spouse is kind of retreating or pushing people away, which one often does if they're, you know, not feeling their best, because that might be their coping mechanism. But also recognizing how that's impacting you. And I always recommend, especially for a spouse that, you know, is experiencing something either complex or mental health related, if they're not open to getting the help, and even if they are, it can also be really helpful for you to also have support and either therapy or even your own social supports, but sharing that experience and being able to have your own support so that that person's mental health doesn't become solely on you.
I agree. And, you know, we want to keep the compassion and empathy, of course. But I think it does get into this nuance sort of conversation of, you know, I'll use myself as an example in having OCD. If I was sort of pushing you out over the long haul, I have awareness it's OCD. It's not that I don't have the awareness. And maybe I'm in treatment, maybe I'm not. But over the long haul, if I'm pushing you out and moving away from you, you are in this relationship.
Yeah.
You are allowed to feel how you feel about that.
Right.
It doesn't mean that you know, minimize someone's mental health experience of like, oh God, like, why the hell do you have OCD? It's a and situation,
Right.
meaning you have OCD. I have sympathy for that. I have compassion for that. And when you're chronically moving away from me, you know, when the intrusive thoughts flare up, you know, over the long haul, it does make me feel, you know, sad or, you know, feel like we're not doing life together. We're not on the same team. You're allowed to feel a type of way. The thing I don't agree with, and sometimes gets touted on social media, of like, whatever my partner is going through, like, I just have to sort of like orbit around that, and I'm not allowed to have a feeling.
Right.
I totally don't agree with that. And that's somebody who has like, you know, mental illness of like, I don't agree.
Yeah.
And I think it becomes nuance. I think some people seek couples therapy for it to really talk out, because it's not simple.
Right.
Again, we don't minimize someone's mental health struggle, but we also don't minimize we're in this relationship together.
Right.
And to zoom all the way forward of like, yes, in some circumstances, relationships don't work out because someone's not getting what they want in a relationship, and they're allowed to feel that way. Of course, I think getting your own therapy, couples therapy, having open communication about this is so imperative.
Yeah. I think the overarching thing to also remember is a lot of times that person's mental health feels like your responsibility. And the thing that I just want to very much dispel is that is absolutely not true. Everyone is, you know, in charge of their own experience and their own mental health. And you loving someone and you caring about someone does not equate to you having to take on their mental health as your responsibility. So that's just always an added layer, I guess.
We agree, and it gets nuanced because sometimes that gets confused of, well, I love you and I care about you, and now I'm responsible for, which to me, I'm like, yeah, that's when you see a lot of attachment things go down, which it's better in some circumstances that you stay above water.
Right.
Meaning when I'm really spiraling my OCD, sometimes it's better you're grounded, you're regulated, and you almost feel like, again, a landing spot,
right,
versus feeling like we both have to go under together. Yeah, I don't agree with it.
Yeah.
But it's so hard, and it is.
Right.
It's so nuanced, and there is only so much we can do. We feel that way
Sure.
as therapists and as professionals, which really nicely bridges into our last question here from Sophie from Colorado.
So,
how do you balance being deeply empathetic without losing yourself to people pleasing? I often put others' feelings first, even when I don't want to, because if they're disappointed, I feel it so strongly.
ooh, that's a great question.
What a nice bridge.
Right?
What a nice bridge between these questions here.
Do you want to tackle it first? Do you want me to go?
Yeah, what are your initial thoughts on that? I feel this way personally. I don't know if you do.
Sure.
I think it's not to say all therapists. Some therapists can be sensitive to other people's emotions and experiences. Early in my therapy, it would have been sort of like halfway through my first year of being a therapist. I was trapped in this of like truly feeling so responsible, almost like godlike responsibility for my clients that train wrecked my mental health, and my OCD spiked like never before. I just felt so responsible, as if I was living their lives.
Yeah.
And that anything that happened, any variation in their mental health was my fault, or again, completely my responsibility. And it made me so ineffective as a therapist. And again, it absolutely tanked my mental health.
Yeah. Which I think is so important to be able to, one, have that awareness of how that is impacting you, especially when it comes to people pleasing or taking on the responsibility of other people's feelings and how they're doing. Because people pleasing, obviously, is on a spectrum and a continuum, and how that impacts you is very individualized. But taking stock in how those moments are impacting you can be so helpful, because you start to recognize, okay, this relationship actually is making me feel not so great, or this dynamic where I'm people pleasing and I am doing something that I don't want to do because I don't want to lose this person, or because I don't want to disappoint them. How is that actually impacting you and the relationship? Because in the short term, it might feel better to not have either a conflict, or to, keep everyone feeling okay, or keep the other person feeling okay, because it doesn't sound like, you're wanting to do those things. But over the long haul, that can actually lead to resentment, that can lead to your mental health tanking, kind of like in your example, Justin. And that then impacts your ability to do things for other people, to take care of other people. Because if you're not taking care of yourself, it can be really hard to then take care of other people or do things for other people. So part of that is exploring what boundaries work for you, where you want to kind of manage expectations with certain things, and also practicing little moments of, how can I take some space before I immediately respond yes to every single request. And that can look like, somebody asking you to do something and you say, I'll have to check my schedule, or I need a minute to think about that. And just giving a little bit of a buffer to then ask yourself those questions. Is this something that I actually want to do? Or is this something that in the long haul is going to negatively impact myself or this dynamic? And then a lot of it is then regulation, and trying to learn tools that are helpful for your own regulation, because the reality is it's uncomfortable to do the things that you don't want to do for other people. And it's also uncomfortable to not do those things and to potentially have some sort of, fallout or conflict or feeling like you are, experiencing the other person's disappointment.
It's so true. And it's a hard pill to swallow. And it's one that I've had to absorb, which is other people's emotions are not my responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
So hard to swallow.
Yeah.
When you're stuck in this pattern of, I feel their emotions. It's not just I see them. I see that you're sad. I feel it.
Mm-hmm. But
you feel it so much harder when you believe this is my responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
It's not. It's not. We can have an impact on others, of course. But this idea that, therefore, I need to tiptoe around everyone or try to make others happy, is
That's
such
heavy.
A heavy and impossible thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care what you do. You could be like, this is maybe a good example. You could be the funniest clown. Some people hate clowns.
Right.
But you could be the funniest and you see half the crowd laughing like, haha. 25% of them are running away. Mm-hmm. You just ruin their day.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the human experience is much different.
Right.
Whoever you are, whatever your stimuli is, again, I'm not giving people permission to be an asshole. I'm not. But I'm saying there's a myth that you can make people or keep people happy. That's not true.
Mm-hmm.
Just as you could say as a therapist, this is the nuance of being a therapist, but you could say something to one client, huge, profound change. You could say the exact words in the exact tone to your next client, and it triggers them in a traumatic way,
for sure,
in a self-esteem way, in all kinds of different directions. And even in the role of therapist, my job is to get curious about that and move with you. But the myth is that I'm responsible for all your emotions. No chance in hell.
Right.
It's not. No matter how sensitive you feel people's emotions, which I feel like I'm pretty damn sensitive. I really do feel it. But just for me, it's allowed me to be like, I'm most effective when I can be curious and be in my role of walking alongside you versus feeling like I am you and I have to absorb and do. It's like, I can't be you.
Right.
I could be right beside you and get curious and sort of stay on top of the water and pull up, as it were. But yeah, we get stuck in these patterns usually because of early life experience and sort of someone making us feel responsible.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Wow. What great questions.
I love these.
Such thoughtful, great questions. Keep filling out the form every week. We'll get to it, keep respawning the question, pepper it in there. We don't mind. But we hope we could be as helpful as possible, talking about all the new research, the importance of research and continuing to investigate in all different ways, because the field's always growing, expanding. We're learning new ways to take care of this human experience. But
this is fun.
Oh, it's a great time. We love science around here. We need to get shirts made. Shirts or hats. We love science. I'm sure those already exist, so we'll probably get sued. But thanks so much for being here. We always appreciate a review, a comment, a share. Thanks for hanging out with us, and we'll see you next week right here on Drop In.
Bye.